Happy Black History Month. Happy Black History Year, as I'm celebrating all year because it is the centennial celebration of Negro History Week. I thank you, Spark Foundation, for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that I can share my slides with you all. Let's see if we can. Perfect. And Jabril, I just want to make sure that my slides are seen before I get started. I don't want that whole lag where. Perfect. Thank you. Hi. So again, as was noted, my name is Natasha Nelson. I am many things, but the most important things that I am today, in my opinion, for this topic and webinar is I am a late diagnosed Black autistic woman and a parent of early intervention and early diagnosed two little Black girls, and the wife of a man, a Black man, who has been diagnosed this whole time, and we had no idea until last week. All of those, I feel like, along with all of those accolades you heard from Jabril, give me the depth that I need to be able to start this webinar. And so I'm so happy to spend this time with you talking about how awareness moves to action and how the need for combating these disparities that we're seeing in the Black autistic communities. So, first is talking about actual autism awareness, right? If I want you to understand the need for action, I want to make sure that we're on the same page about the understanding of autism. And so I always like to talk about the it's a spectrum comment that is said, because when we're saying it's a spectrum, I don't think everyone is on the same page about what that means. A lot of times when people say it's a spectrum, they mean a linear spectrum. And so it's this idea of, oh, she's a little bit autistic. She can do a webinar. She's able to speak and give us a webinar in the first place. She's able to put slides together. She's high functioning. She's married with children. She's high functioning. And for that, on the other end of that spectrum, you give people like my oldest daughter, who is minimum speaking, who is diagnosed as level 3, who has a actual intellectual developmental disability along concurring with her autism. You limit her because, oh, she's very autistic. So, no, she can't do that. You shouldn't put your child in summer camp. You shouldn't put your child in this soccer program because we're not going to be able to support her. She's too autistic. And that linear spectrum of not autistic to very autistic is limiting to both that supposedly high functioning child and that supposedly low functioning child or adult. You're limiting both by your labels and perception. And so we want to move from this linear idea of spectrum to a more circular idea of spectrum. And what the way that I like to do that is by explaining what is affected when we talking about the autism spectrum disorder. So first, of course, I'm going to give you the CDC general dictionary definition, which is autism spectrum disorder is a complex neurological developmental condition that is characterized by social interactions, challenges in social interactions, communications, and behavioral patterns. It is very much believed, and I'm very much proof in that early diagnosis is crucial for effective support and intervention. That being said, there are five very distinct areas that we have those major challenges in, and where you can see the spectrum of autism. The first that I always like to teach is sensory. You have eight senses, not five. I know you've heard about those five. Those five are your external senses. But you also have three internal senses, your interoception sense that tells you what's happening with your body, such as how do you know you're hungry? How do you know you're thirsty? How do you know that you need to urinate or defecate and you have to in toileting? How do you know that your body is hot? And how do you know that you have actually have a pain or a cut or a bruise on your body. That is your interoception sensory capacity that tells your body what's going on with your body. You also have your vestibular sense, which is your sense of movement outside of your body and pertaining to gravity on this earth. And then finally, you have your proprioception sense, which is your sense of movement inside your body, how your muscles, tendons move. And that affects our motor skills, which is why you may see some of us who really struggle with things like putting toothpaste on a toothbrush, tying our shoes, writing on paper. So we have sensory that we've just covered. We also have motor skills that we've just covered. The next thing that is highly affected by autism is executive function. Your executive function is basically the air traffic controller in your brain that's helping you with your working memory, your mental flexibility, your impulse control, your organization. It's that air traffic controller in your prefrontal cortex that's allowing you to function in this world. And for some of us with autism, that air traffic controller may not be as trained, or that air traffic controller may be taking a break. And our next area where we are affected is our perception. So, your sensory is the input that is put into your body. Your perception is what you perceive of that input. So, while we may have sensory processing disorder and the neurons that go to our brain for that sensory experience may be different than a neurotypical person, we also may perceive those neurons differently. And then finally, communication and social interactions. So everything from speech and whether or not we speak, from cognitive comprehension to understanding social norms and social interactions. Now, because the world isn't easy, we could be on different areas of a spectrum in each of these five areas. So if you have met one person with autism, you have met one person with autism. I live in a household, and everybody in this household is autistic. My husband, who again we found out last week was autistic, is autistic. My two daughters are autistic, and I am autistic. And we are very different people. And our motor skills all look different. Our communication and social actions all look very different. Our perceptions are very different. Our executive function and executive dysfunction is very different. And our sensory processing is very different, right? But all of us have autism because all of those five areas are affected and disable us in some way in this society with the societal norms and expectations that are placed on us. And so, understanding autism as in the support we need and how we're affected, as opposed to this linear spectrum of a little autistic and big autistic, is a very important need, especially when we're talking about combating disparities in the Black community. As more Black people get diagnosed, the way we see autism is going to look very different because of the different disparities and social economic disparities that we see in the Black community. And so that is very important to understand. So, let's talk about why I'm here. I'm at the Spark webinar. What is Spark? Spark is bridging autism gaps along with the community. Their mission is to improve the lives of people with autism by identifying the causes of autism and informing more effective therapies, treatments, services, and support. They believe that in order to understand the complexity of autism and what makes us the same and what makes us different, basically what is neurotypical and what is neurodivergent, and what makes us need all of those things is a large number of people to participate in research, right? Spark is open to all individuals living in the United States with a professional diagnosis of autism and their family members. I Outside of the work I do with Spark, which we will talk about when we talk about my advocacy, I am a member of Spark. My entire family has done the research, the genetics testing. We do the surveys when we remember because we all suffer from executive dysfunction with the goal of having this amazing family that all has autism, of helping with research and understanding that can bridge these gaps, that can give us knowledge, not for a cure, but for support, for treatments, for making sure we're mitigating that large disparity we're seeing for Black and African American families. So what is my advocacy? What does that look like? Well, I'm not just autistic. I also have ADHD and OCD. And I say that because you're probably going to say I'm doing way too much. Uh, but I do have my own nonprofit where I try to do at least four 9 week, yes, you heard me, 9 week free virtual supernova parenting classes. That class includes positive discipline. It includes neurological and developmental education on not just autism, but all different types of neurodivergence. It includes understanding of child development with neurotypical children or neurodivergent children. It includes understanding of polyvagal theory, understanding the need for somatic and sensory regulation tactics. It includes being kind and firm at the same time, and understanding how to support communities of people who are dealing with disparities and differences, and also dealing with neurodivergence, autism, intellectual developmental disabilities, and mental health vulnerabilities. So that's why it's 9 weeks. And that's also why I feel it should be free. And so I try to do four of those per year. I am also a advocate who joins my community in talking to my representatives, and advocating at my state capitol, as well as our United States Capitol, for different policies that support families that are navigating disabilities. So I have been with my Georgia Council of Developmental Disabilities to the actual Capitol of the United States to talk to all of our representatives, but particularly my representatives, about the need to, one, get more funding for the Autism Cares Act, which funds a lot of the programs that I learned, all the information that I learned in order to care for my family and other families, but also to put more money in that as we're seeing a growing number of minorities diagnosed with autism, not just Black families, but Latina families, Asian families, and Native American families. I have also participated in a documentary that was a partnership between Georgia Tech and the Color of Autism, called Navigating Autism in Communities of Color. I'm very proud of that particular product. It was very much trying to illuminate families, practitioners, teachers, anyone who is in these communities, to understand what it is like for these families to navigate the process, not just of diagnosis, but of finding support resources and the financial hardships that come along with that. I am also a family advocate and self advocate, a representative for the ECHO Autism Primary Care Early Diagnosis Program here in Georgia. Now, what is all of that? A whole bunch of words, right? Basically, what we do is we train pediatricians, particularly pediatricians in rural areas who are not right here in metro Atlanta and in the Atlanta area, to have the tools to be able to diagnose children who have obvious signs of autism. So not those particular cases where we're not sure, where we need more research, we need more testing, we need genetic testing, but those very obvious cases, so that we're limiting that very long waiting list that we're seeing for so many families, particularly in rural areas, who are not able to get a diagnosis for 2, 3, 4 years, by empowering some of these pediatricians to have the tools to be able to support those families as early as possible. And then lastly, I partner with Spark. I partner with Spark in traveling all over the country. In that role, I'm constantly talking to the Black community in particular about the importance of us participating in research. I'm going to be very honest and frank when I say I understand why the Black community is hesitant to try to participate in any research. It is Black History Month. I am a Black woman. I'm aware of the medical apartheid that has happened in this country with African American people. I'm aware of such actions as the Tuskegee experiments, where no, they did not give those personnel syphilis, as is rumored, but they were aware that those personnel had syphilis, aware that those personnel thought that they were being treated for syphilis when they were not. They were just being monitored and viewed to see how syphilis depreciates the body without their knowledge. And so it's things like that that we have either made into heightened rumors or that we know the true history of that makes us hesitant. Henrietta Sachs, I believe the name is, and I'm gonna double check that. My brain sometimes pulls directly from memory and sometimes it doesn't. That good old executive function air traffic controller. But the stem cells of Henrietta have been used without that family's permission for generations. They are still fighting for the legacy of that family member. And so it's things like that that make the Black community very hesitant to be open to the idea of research. But what I always, as I travel with the Spark community to speak in their in community program, tell them is you need data in order to get resources, in order to get resources, get funding, in order to get any type of support services for the Black community. There has to be data and research. That is what these corporations, the government, the people who fund these support resources, the people who fund these organizations, these autism therapy centers, they are looking at data and research. And if there is no data and research on the Black community will continue to fall behind in disparities of support, intervention, and diagnosis for Black families. And so that is what I travel with the Spark Foundation to speak about. So, the stark reality, autism can be interpreted differently in Black people. Why is that? Well, how you move around this world very much is about your socialization. What is your socialization? Who raised you? Your mom and them, right? The communities that you go to, the church that you go to, the school that you go to, the media that you watch, the family, the people, the community, they are all a part of your socialization. And because of that, if you are a person who is constantly surrounded by Black people, then your culture, your interpretation of social norms, your interpretation of what's normal may be different than what is in the DSM-5 because that research and data is based off mostly white boys. And so, in a Black household, I always tell people I hand flap, but the way I hand flap is like this. I like to have rhythm with my hand flap. And so, my hand flap, anyone who's ever seen me in person before I present, I very much start doing this over and over again. That is my hand flap. I like rhythm with my hand flap. I also like to stem my nails. I like having acrylic nails, mostly so I don't bite my nails off to the gristle because I am autistic and I do have stimulatory repetitive behaviors that can be self-harming. And this is a method of me supporting myself. But also because I like to tap my nails. I like to swing my hair. It's very long now, and I like to swing it on my back. That is a stem for me. I like to twist my hair. That is a stem to me. I like to pop my butt. That is a stem for me. Instead of walking on my toes, I like the hop, what we call wobble, where you kind of bounce your butt on your toes. So these things are stimulatory behavior. They are repetitive behaviors that I do in order to soothe myself in social situations. However, in my household, popping your butt is not different. um, tapping your nails on the table is not very different. Even having rhythm with your hands, beatboxing, flapping your hands because you got new nails done, moving your hair and shaking your beads. Those are not things that are seen as abnormal in the Black community. And so my socialization may hide some of my stemming repetitive behaviors and things that I need that support my autism, right? And so we also talk about social norms when we talk about things like social interactions. In the Black community, we don't want you all up in our face looking at us all in our area, what we call our personal space. And so this idea that you're supposed to stare someone in the eyes and give them your active attention, the way it's read is very unusual to a lot of Black communities and Black families because we don't want you all in our grill. Give me some space. Those are very much terms that are in our vernacular. Get up out my grill. And so also, pointing. One of the distinct signs, especially for early intervention, is does your child point at things or grab your hand and take you to them? But I'm going to tell you, in my Black household, it's disrespectful to do all that pointing. Don't be pointing in people's face and pointing at people. It's disrespectful. So it makes sense to grab someone and take them to the thing. So it's just small things like that. I always give the example of even when you were born can be a difference in social norms. You know, when I was born, we used to pretend to talk on the phone like this because we had rotary phones and you would hold the rotary phone to your ear and your mouth like this. So when you pretend to talk on the phone, you talk like this. But now children will grab a phone or pretend phone and they'll talk like this, like they're on speaker, or they'll talk like this because it's a cellular phone. So your socialization dictates what you think is normal. And if you have different cultures, different socialization, then guess what? How autism looks in that household is going to look different. And what is different is going to be considered different. So, some of the important things that I want to speak to my Black community about is that autism is a lifelong condition. I am still autistic. I still STEM. I still struggle with executive function. I still have sensory processing disorder, which is why I have locks because I'm tender-headed, as we like to say, and I don't like getting my hair combed. It is excruciating. As soon as I get done with this webinar, I'm going to take this ponytail out or it will give me a headache. So, lifelong condition. We also have higher rates of either misdiagnosis or no diagnosis. Why? Because if I am having trouble with my emotions, I am very particular about my sensory, my clothes, my environment. I struggle with social norms and with fitting in with other children, and I am Black, I am a problem. I am a misbehavior. I am maladaptive, but not in a sense of a condition. It is something I can control. I am the problem. And that is how our society, our schools, and a lot of community places look at Black children who show the symptoms of autism. My husband was not diagnosed with autism. He was diagnosed with persuasive developmental disorder. We had no idea that even was autism. Apparently, that is an outdated term. It's not even in the DSM-5 anymore, and it's now under the umbrella of autism. But we had no idea about that because Black children don't get the benefit of autism. They get they get things like oppositional disorder or behavioral disorders as opposed to a complex neurological disorder, right? How we support ourselves may look different over time, but it is a lifelong complex condition. And you are not alone. There are other Black people who are autistic, whether they be children, whether they be adults. I've helped a 64-year-old Black woman get diagnosed before. There is support and resources out there for you. So let's talk about some autism disparities and why they are there, right? So, first, we have delayed diagnosis. Many Black children experience significant delays in receiving an autism diagnosis. Now, there are different reasons of why this is. I never want to make sure that people understand that. There could be a lack of awareness in that household. A lot of times, Black communities do not even get information about the different ways that autism can show up. A lot of people, when I give my talk of the 5 areas that affect autism and how those can affect the child on a difference in spectrum instead of this idea of a little autistic to major autistic, they tell me that's the first time they've ever heard that. They've never heard of sensory processing disorder and that the fact that you have 8 senses and how that interacts with a child's life. They've never even heard of executive function, and a lot of them tell me, well, my executive function stinks too. Am I autistic? And so awareness and education a lot of times is not something that is given the grace of in the Black community, right? But then we also have a lack of competent cultural healthcare providers who can recognize those early signs while understanding exactly what I said, the differences in cultural socialization in the Black community, right? You also have a limit in access, right? A lot of times, these essential services that are needed to get these diagnoses, to get support resources, they're just structurally not available geographically and financially to Black families, right? Therefore, opportunities like early intervention, which technically is free, may not be available to them because they're in a rural area that has a 3-year wait list. Or they may have financial burdens where there are programs in their area, but they're outpriced for that particular family. And then you have the actual cultural stigma. There is a stigma in the Black community of what because of the lack of awareness and education that autism is a white disorder for white boys. But I would also argue that's because scientists, researchers, and the media have focused on white boys. The research, the information that is in the DSM-5 is based off research, data, and information of young white boys. And because of that, as a whole complexity, a lot of the Black community has a fear of the label of autism or of any type of disorder on their child. If you add to that the 400 years of transatlantic chattel slavery, along with the 200 plus years of systemic racism from things like Jim Crow, redlining, gerrymandering, on and on and on we could go, there is a fear of being less than. And a lot of people, whether they're whatever race they are, whatever ethnicity they are, whatever culture they are, see disability as less than. And so a movement of normalizing disability in itself, I think would help a lot with the issue of the Black community being terrified of the label of disabled, of the label of autism. Because disabled, I tell people all the time, your body is temporarily able. Everybody is temporarily able. You are either going to die young or you will be disabled at some point in your life. It is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing less than about that. That is the reality of life. I like to say it is what it is. And so allowing your child to understand what's happening to their body, allowing your child to have the problem solving techniques and critical thinking to learn how to support and accommodate themselves and communicate their needs and accommodations to others will change the trajectory of their lives. But we have to let go, my African American, Black community, of this cultural stigma and fear of labels of autism and disability. So for me, I am a autistic Black woman. I am a disabled Black woman. And I am a whole lot of woman. And there is nothing wrong with that. So let's dig a little deeper. The number of Black children diagnosed with autism actually is growing. For the first time ever in the United States in 2020, we saw the number of Black children, Hispanic children, and Asian children being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder actually be more than white children. First time ever that those numbers are growing. But there's also reasons for that. And again, I told you I was going to speak very straightforward that there are rumors and that there is talk because of that cultural stigma of this being a conspiracy and of them trying to make our children autism and there being some great autistic agenda. And I'm aware that even some people in our government have had this idea. And what I will tell you is if you have more awareness, if you have more data, and if you actually start caring about people who traditionally did not get medical care, who were not cared of, and who were not incorporated in research and data, then yes, the numbers are going to grow. So I don't think it's one reason. I think it's multiple reasons. I think that we have slowly been doing what we need to do with our civil rights and with our activism to stop the medical apartheid that has been happening in the minority communities, particularly the Black community. And because of that, Black people and Black families have been more included in research and data as they would like. And they've also been going to the hospital more, been receiving more medical care, been getting diagnosed and supported more. And that is a beautiful thing. But yes, that means our numbers will rise. I also believe that organizations like the Color of Autism, personnel and advocates like Morenike Okoye have been working their behinds off to bring more awareness to the Black community. Personnel, even in the media, like Holly Robinson Pete, have been in the Black communities spreading the message of awareness and acceptance of autism, which will make those numbers grow. And then finally, if you are supporting autistic people and accommodating autistic people, they go old and they have babies, and their babies might be autistic. I am a living representation of it. I am a autistic adult married to an autistic man with two autistic babies, and that is going to grow the numbers. Traditionally, we were put in institutions, we were threw away by our families, we were not allowed to grow old. And we are now allowed to grow old and have lives with the right support and accommodations. Those numbers are going to grow. Let's dig even more deeper. The number of children with autism spectrum disorder and co occurring intellectual developmental disabilities is growing. Now, why is this important? Because a lot of times when people are willing to accept the diagnosis of autism, they are still wanting to make us into this superhuman, what is the word I'm looking for? Rain Man, of we're brilliant, we're special, we're awesome. Can I just be regular? Is it okay for me to be an autistic Black woman and not have to be this extraordinary super person who's awesome and has super talents that you just need to know to accept me and humanize me? Can I just be humanized because I'm a Black woman? It does not matter if I'm autistic or not. I don't need to be super or awesome. I could have an intellectual developmental disability and I'm still a human. I deserve accommodations. I deserve support. I deserve data. I deserve research. I deserve medical attention. All of those things are still deserving, whether a person with an autism diagnosis just has autism and does have this magnificent brain that can draw murals or figure out different complex numbers and has eidetic memory, or if I'm just an autistic person who's really good at video games and I have sensory seeking behaviors and I eat a lot of sugar and dopamine, both of those things are humans that are valid and deserve support and accommodations. And so it is very much, I very much want people to realize that autism can be a beautiful thing, and it has many positive traits, and it also has challenges that need support, and those challenges are okay too. Awareness and acceptance of not just autism, but intellectual developmental disabilities, anxiety, co-occurring diagnoses that happen a lot with autistic people. So, what are some of these factors that are contributing to these disparities, right? So, first we have systemic barriers, right? I've talked a little bit about this in the Black community, right? We talked about the inequitable health systems, the discriminatory practices, the history of medical apartheid, inadequate funding for autism programs, particularly when they are providing and supporting Black communities. And I say that from experience as a nonprofit holder of who teaches and provides resources and support for Black, but all people of color who are navigating neurodevelopmental disabilities, intellectual developmental disabilities, and mental health vulnerabilities, it is very hard for me to receive funding. I sometimes have had to reach out to mentors crying in frustration because as soon as I say that, yes, I service everyone, but my focus is going to be on social disability justice and I am focused on the Black community, I'm not allowed to get a lot of opportunities. And so addressing these barriers is a crucial for ensuring equitable support for families and individuals affected by autism. As I said, these numbers are growing. We're seeing growing numbers that are now outsourcing white children, of Latina children, of Black children, of Asian children, needing support resources, needing data, needing research, and needing funding. And so those systemic barriers need to be addressed. The next is economic barriers. This plays a critical role in the disparities placed by Black families because there's a reason there are limited resources, financial resources in the Black community. Again, 400 years of transatlantic chattel slavery means 400 years of free labor that built the country that the Black community did not see. Then 250 plus years of systemic racism, gerrymandering, redlining, not allowing GI members who served their country to buy homes with their GI Bill, not allowing families to go to schools that are equitable and have the same resources, not allowing families to get jobs due to a name and throwing their resume in the trash. All of those things have contributed to the limited financial resources in the Black community. And until this country acknowledges that, they can't fix that. And it does need to be rectified. It does need to be addressed. And it hinders access to necessary diagnostic services and interventions that are not provided for free by the government. Additionally, social economic stress can affect family dynamics. Having no money or having low financial resources and navigating any type of neurodivergence, intellectual developmental disability, or mental health vulnerability is debilitating. Everything in this world costs money. This is the United States of America. It is run on capitalism. And if your financial resources are low and your needs are high, it is very hard to navigate these systems. And so a lot of families break apart, a lot of families break down, and it is very understandable. So let's be real. I've tried to be as real as I could possibly be here, but who and how do we address these needs? Right? I've been very blunt about what the issues are, about what is needed. Whose responsibility is that? What is in our locus of control? What is in our locus of influence? There are different peoples on this call. Your locus of control and influence may be very different from mine. We can only do what we can do, and we can only influence what we can influence. But knowing Understanding and spreading the information is half the battle. So how can we, what does it look like to make a difference? First, advocating for policies like the Autism Cares Act, but actually going deeper than that. We now know the disparities that are happening in the Black community, because this is Black History Month, but also in other people of color's communities. And so adding to these policies with specification about grants and funding and support and resources for those communities that are seeing those growing numbers, right? To ensure they have access to resources and services, promoting equality, equity, and understanding. Support Black organizations. And I'm not just saying that because I am a Black organization. I showed you the research and data. I'm telling you that because it is needed in the research and data. Invest in and collaborate with Black-led organizations that have a record and show that they are strengthening the community ties, that they tailor these resources particularly to these families, and that these families are learning, growing, and getting support. Promote early screening. Encourage those early screening and interventions and teach education and awareness on what those early signs and screenings look like to improve the outcomes for Black youth with autism. As I said, my oldest was diagnosed at 2 years old. My youngest was diagnosed at 18 months. My oldest is minimum speaking. She was diagnosed as nonverbal or non-speaking. She is now a minimum speaking child. She's still considered level 3. She has now also been diagnosed with ADHD and an intellectual developmental disability. My youngest was diagnosed at 18 months, but she is a vivacious speaker. She was speaking all the time. She is the reason I knew I needed to get diagnosed. She was hyperlexic. She taught herself how to read. She struggled. She was able to speak, communicate with us, and copy us, but she struggled to walk up until she was 18 months due to anxiety. She showed very early signs of anxiety that I'd never seen in a baby before. And we learned what that was, what that looked like. And we got her first in the early intervention program and eventually diagnosed. And because she has had the early intervention since she was 18 months, I actually have a parent teacher conference next week where I have to sit down with her teacher and kindly ask her teacher why she told my daughter that she was not autistic. She just needs to learn to control her emotions. And since I'm trying to look on the positive side of that, I see that as early intervention did so much support for my child that she has a public school educator who does not even recognize her autism. Isn't that a beauty? So the last one is raise community. Oh, sorry, my hands are quick. Raise community awareness in the communities that foster understanding and acceptance of autism. Again, before we can start saying the Black community needs to accept autism, there hasn't been an effort to actually do awareness and education of autism, particularly in the Black community outside of things like the color of autism, autism in Black. And so I want to have more support funding, more support into these Black organizations so we can have even more awareness and acceptance of what autism actually looks like. Not this, it's just the spectrum and woe is me, my life is hard because I have a child with autism. But autism awareness that is centered around actual autistic adults and children who can tell you about their experiences and supportive, loving families who know what it looks like when you get help and resources. So we can break down those cultural stigma so we can see examples of connection of other families like us. That is important. So, what will you do? How will you join us in fostering change and awareness today? What does that look like for you? What is in your locus of control? What is in your locus of influence? And how will you spread the information that you learned today? I hope that you do it as much as possible, as much as you can. That is how we bring equity to the situation, not just equality. Equity is needed. Thank you so much for having me. And here's my contact information, everyone. I believe we're going to move now to the Q&A.
That was awesome, Natasha. Thank you so much. And you're right, we're going to jump right over to Q&A. You have a couple of questions coming in, and I'm sure more are going to come in as we ask you more questions. So let me pull them up and we can get started. Okay. Let us start with the color of autism. You briefly mentioned the color of autism. Can you share a little bit more about that organization?
Absolutely. I love the color of autism. So, the color of autism is an organization very similar to mine, but a little bit different. I like to tell families that my organization teaches families how to navigate neurological disorders, mental health vulnerabilities, and intellectual developmental disabilities in their home. So I teach them positive discipline in their home. I teach them how to understand the diagnosis, how to support, accommodate, and help their child in the home. The color of autism focuses on teaching you how to do that outside of your home. So, how to understand IEPs, how to talk to and understand the systems that are going on with healthcare, understanding waiver systems, understanding the resources that are available in your community for your child, such as summer camps, such as grants and funding. They have a free 5 week virtual caregiver provider course that they give. They also have a support group for families of color who are looking to find other parents of color who are understanding, who are navigating the same system. And lastly, they have a Black father support group because the Black fathers felt like they had particular challenges and particular conversations that they wanted to have that a lot of parents and caregivers who are in these autism communities do not understand, such as the fear of their child combating with the police department or the fear of their child being targeted and not knowing how to react. And so Black fathers wanted their own space to navigate this, and the color of autism provided it. And they also partner with Spark. And they have me for a lot of the teaching. And they actually, if you do their 5 week program, now Camille Proctor, who's the founder, is very strict. You have to do all 5 weeks. She pays for you to do 9 weeks with me. So you get the comprehensive outside of your household and inside of your household support awareness for your child.
Thank you, Natasha. Yes, as Natasha mentioned, the Color of Autism is one of our national partners. And you all could look out and follow our social media to find our in person Color of Autism parent trainings where Natasha will likely be speaking. We'll be in Texas, Houston, Texas, Baltimore, Maryland, in the Mississippi Delta region, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Salt Lake City, Utah, Atlanta, Georgia, and Seattle, Washington this year. And we'll share more throughout the year on our social media. So keep up with us. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and all the other platforms. Okay, back to the questions. I'm a pediatric OT, a mom of a level 1 autistic boy. Many Black parents don't want evaluations or screenings due to not wanting their child to be labeled or treated differently. How can we encourage them to get early intervention?
So I always, the first thing I tell my providers who I help in my pediatric program with, Emory and the Children's Hospital of Atlanta is give them some examples of families navigating autism. Social media is beautiful now in that there are a lot of families. I mean, I stopped and I can go into why I stopped, but I don't want to mess up this thing. But
Mhm.
there are a lot of families who are showcasing their life and navigating autism. And so maybe seeing some of those Black families, some of those Black individuals, especially the autistic adult advocates, will normalize it for them because a lot of Black people we're very big on connections, right? On our people and what our people are doing. That's one. But for two, I always tell a family when they tell me they don't want to label their child. Your child already got 15 labels. They're a Black kid in America. They already have labels. And as a late diagnosed autistic person, I already had labels that said I was autistic. It was just synonyms: weird, annoying,
Mhm.
inquisitive, know it all. Those were all synonyms for symptoms of my autism. They don't go away. Your child is still labeled. I was eating paper. You think I wasn't labeled as the eating paper kid? I wish someone would have got me support for that.
This next question is sort of two-pronged. It's first about you and what made you seek an autism diagnosis. And then the second part of it is what, for an adult that's curious about seeking an evaluation for themselves. Um, can you share a little bit about the process and what that looks like?
Sure. So first, my first daughter, like I said, she's a level 3 minimum speaking autistic child. And I say all of that because all of her signs and symptoms of autism very much show up like the DSM-5. It is everything we see in the data and research. And so it's very easy to get her diagnosed. But I still saw things that they would label as signs of autism that I was like, wait, I did that. Are you sure that's uh, but I because our autism shows up so very different, I was like, maybe I just see myself in her because I'm her mother. And then I had my second child. And with my second child, when they were saying those were signs of autism, I was like, wait a minute, that is like all me. And at the time, I was very much struggling with being a human and being a mother. I was frustrated because I felt like everyone around me who was also a new parent was finding their balance and I couldn't find a balance. I was floundering on a sensory level, I was floundering on an executive function level, and I couldn't get my life together and I did not know why. I now know I was in autistic burnout. At the time, I just thought I was failing as a human because I would put my all into being a parent and then I wouldn't have anything left to be a human. And so I was gaining massive amounts of weight. My hair was falling out. My house was a mess, but it's my kids' playroom and their room wasn't, but the rest of the house was a mess. Uh, and so many things were just dropping because I could only focus on being a parent. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And so I was seeing those signs, and I talked to my pediatrician, and I'm very blessed because while I was going through my first daughter's diagnosis, we were in the military with military doctors, and they kept telling me, just wait, just wait, just wait. Uh, and then my husband decided to get out, we moved here to Atlanta, and we very much were focused on getting not only very highly credentialed and very knowledgeable providers, but providers of color who would listen to us. And so when I went to my primary care provider and told her my concerns and also
Mhm.
the fact that both of my children were diagnosed, she was like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. You don't have to tell me anything else. I'll write the referral, but where do I refer
Mhm.
you to?"
Mhm.
She had no idea. And I was like, huh. So then I said, well, let me contact my insurance organization, and they should be able to give me a list of providers that can diagnose me. And
Mhm.
so I contacted my insurance, and they did give me a list. And when I called those places, every last one of them were for children. They did not diagnose adults, and I was getting extremely frustrated. I went to the provider who had diagnosed both my daughters, and asked them, and they didn't have any resources either. And so eventually I went to Emory's Autism Center at Emory School of Medicine, and they had a list of providers that they knew here in Georgia that diagnosed adults. And it was only 5 personnel on that list, by the way.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so when I called those 5, only one took my insurance. And I went and I got the diagnosis process, but then my insurance only covered so much of it. And here's the problem with being late diagnosed that people don't tell you about: autism and trauma. And when I say trauma, I mean toxic trauma or generational trauma. Um,
Mhm.
or what some people call complex PTSD, where you're constantly in it over and over and over again. It's also known as adverse childhood experience, having a very high ACEs count. Um, that can look very similar to autism and the symptoms and the things and everything. And so I had to do 2 years of evaluations, assessments, and tests
Wow.
because the psychologist wanted to be thorough in my diagnosis. And his
Mhm.
problem was he was not sure what was before. Were some of these symptoms showing up when I was a child, or did these symptoms come after the trauma, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so being thorough in all of that. And so he did things like sending surveys and interviews to my best friend, my husband, the people in my community, to find out if some of these signs were there when I was a child. I did everything. I even did the little graphics test where you do the puzzles and the thing where you see the one and you hear the one and you have to tap
Mhm.
all of the things. Um, and then I was like, yes, I'm gonna get some answers. They're gonna tell me which one I have. And at the end of it, they say, girl, you got all of them. You got trauma and autism and ADHD and
Wow. Wow.
OCD and general
Mhm.
anxiety disorder. Um, but now, because I have been blessed after my diagnosis and after my children's diagnosis of being fully autistic and making this my special interest and diving directly in and getting as much education and certification and college degree I possibly can on it, I do
Mhm.
have a list from a organization called Neuroclastic that has a registry of places in each state that diagnose adults. And so I will make sure that that is given to the Spark organization. They probably already have it, but I will make sure that is given to Jabril along with my slides. If someone is interested in having that registry and looking into diagnosis as an autistic adult.